If you're in the process of buying a leasehold property, or if you've got existing issues with your current lease, today's video is going to be for you, as I am going to be going through a lease, everything it means for you and your property, the things you need to look at in your lease, and why it is going to become your Bible. Your lease is the thing you cannot afford to not read page by page. It is the instruction manual you need to know inside out. You can't skip it, and this video is for all the people like myself that thought they knew better and didn't need to read it. This is going to be a really informative video, and the key things you need to look for when you're purchasing a leasehold property, and the key areas in a lease that are going to be the most important aspects you pay attention to. So let's kick it off. What exactly is a lease? Now, your lease when you purchase a leasehold property is actually all you own with your property. You don't own a single brick, and it is a glorified rental agreement essentially between you and the freeholder, or what some people might call a landlord. Now, this document is very, very extensive, and it is probably what will put a lot of people off trying to read it from page to page if they don't know a lot about leasehold. My lease, this was from my flat, I have now sold it, was 37 pages long. There's so much information in there, a lot of stuff that you will not want to understand or need to understand, but there's also a lot in there that may seem like gobbledygook, but you really, really need to know what you're looking for to make sure you don't miss anything that could be really important for the purchase of your new leasehold property, or perhaps something that you need to back up with your existing lease and your freeholder. So essentially, in a nutshell, your lease is the Bible for your property. It pertains everything and anything to do with your lease, which could be your rights as a leaseholder, what you're able to do with the property, and what you have to do in your property. It will have your tenant covenants, which is probably one of the most important aspects, and this will include things about your ground rent, your service charges, and also any insurance demands that you get each year as well. There'll be anything to do with alterations in your lease, which is usually something that you need to inquire about anyway, forfeiture of lease, but also many clauses that might be unique to your specific lease. And that's why it's really important to read it from page to page, and to have a solicitor that really knows a lot about leasehold and essentially what they're doing. Because when I purchased my leasehold property, so many things got missed that later got picked up when I went to sell my property. Now, I get asked a question quite a bit. I have lots of blog posts over on Sleek-chic interiors about leasehold property. I'll link some of those in the caption below. Basically, like, what can I do if I don't have a lease? You will get a lease when you purchase a leasehold property, and your solicitors should be able to provide you with a draft whilst you are purchasing the property. If you already own your leasehold property and you don't have a lease, you need to get one as soon as possible, so you know what you're paying for and what they can realistically charge for the future, as well as everything else you need to know about your property. So there's two ways to go about getting a lease. If you've recently purchased it, obviously go back for your solicitor. They should have those details, and also check your emails from the purchase as well, because you will have received them at some point. If you've had the property for a really long period of time, you need to contact your freeholder. Your freeholder can absolutely get you a copy of the lease, but it's probably going to cost you a little bit of money to do so. It was definitely true for my freeholder. You had to pay for stuff like that as well. I can't remember off the top of my head, but we're not talking about £10 or £20. Like, it is going to be from £50 and upwards to get a copy of your lease, but it's going to be the best money you ever spend, because you could find potential stuff in the lease that you didn't know about that is super important, especially when it comes to selling your flat in the future. Now, as I said, there is a huge table of contents, which is just one of those things you just don't ever want to read. But the first thing I want to discuss is tenant covenants, and I'm going to show you exact examples of what was in my lease so you can get an idea of what it looks like, and you can compare it to yours as well. Tenant covenants is basically everything in place that you need to abide by as a leaseholder, and this includes ground rent, service charges, and insurance demands, but it could also include other elements as well which are unique to your lease and your property. The first one is ground rent, and this will usually be called rent on your agreement. The ground rent is paid to your freeholder annually or biannually, and is basically just to say, this is the money for having my property on the land that you own. That's literally all it is. It doesn't actually go towards anything. Now, the rent will lay out when your rent is due each year, how often it's due, whether they do it on 2 payments, if it's just an annual fee, but it's also going to detail how much your rent is today and how much it might be in the future. So there's going to be a clause in there about increasing ground rents. Now, typically this is done in line with RPI, or it could be a fixed percentage or amount of money, you know, every 10 years, every 20 years. Now this is very specific to your lease. It's going to be different for everyone. For me, it was £250, which was already classed as an AST, an assured short hold tenancy, which created my issues when I was selling, but it was rising with the rate of RPI every 10 years. So in 2026, it was due to increase, and I really don't know how this figure is calculated, but obviously it's in line with inflation, so it's going to be, you know, it could be quite substantial if inflation doesn't drop by 2026. Now the next one is service charges. Now this is a little bit vague in my lease. It was never actually detailed how much the service charge was going to be, because this is what will be detailed on your year accounts. This was a brand new lease when I purchased the property, so there's very little information at the time, and it's mostly about when it's going to be invoiced to you. So it was charged in 2 equal installments on specified rent payment dates, and basically just a little bit of information of if you don't pay it in time, that there will be late repayment charges, which you will get with any big freeholder in the UK. Now the next one is an interesting one, and I don't see a lot of people talking about it, but it's building insurance. Now of course, if you have a leasehold property, you're not actually responsible for the building insurance, the freeholder is. But what happens is they take out a policy each year, which obviously in my lease, they're meant to actually give us a few options to choose from, which never happened. And they'll normally go with someone who's actually a partner, so they'll get a kickback, which is very, very common in freeholders. So basically, our insurance was not included in the service charge, and that was something I was very naive to when I purchased the leasehold flat. I just thought it was part of the service charge. It's absolutely not. It was added on top. So as you can imagine, it quickly adds up on top of everything else you've got to pay for. I think it was around £500 each for the year, and that was an instalment that was due literally within the month. But again, it's going to be different for everyone, but you really need to pay close attention to that to see if it's actually going to be included in your service charge or if it's an additional payment. It's also going to detail other information about utilities. So in our property, for example, the water bill was split between everyone. It was meant to be equal to what you had used, but obviously because there was one water meter, it was really difficult to actually say, to prove whether, you know, we had actually used that amount of water and stuff and what we were having to pay for it. So utilities are obviously invoiced, and again, those will have to be payable within a month. It will all be detailed in your lease. It's going to be different for every single flat. And also another thing to note here as well is when you pay for stuff, you have to pay for the VAT that is included on any invoices in the property. And of course, your freeholder will be a limited business. They will be VAT registered. They claim that VAT back, so they're getting that money as well. And when you understand those sort of things, it makes you even angrier about how the leasehold system works. Now, under tenant covenants, we've also got the interesting thing of alterations. Now, if you're not too familiar with leaseholds and having a lease agreement, the alterations in an interior of a property, aside from, you know, cosmetic with painting, you have to ask for permission from your freeholder before you're able to do so. Alterations are usually things to do with structural or, you know, new kitchens, new bathrooms, and big changes. So I'll just read what mine says: not to make any external or structural alteration or addition to the property, or make any opening in any boundary of the property, or cut or maim any structural parts of the building. So it's all quite simple, to be honest, and unless you are making structural changes, you probably can get away with it, but it's always worth that email beforehand, because essentially if you forfeit your lease, the freeholder can take the property back from you. Now, inquiries of course do cost money, and with our freeholder it was around £80 for a simple inquiry, and you have to do this with pets as well. Anything to do with pets will be detailed in your lease, and most freeholders don't allow them unless you obviously ask for permission. Now, another part that's really worth reading in your lease is the regulations. Now, the regulations is going to be different for every lease, but it's normally laid out in a numbered bullet point list of basically everything you have to do in the property and what you cannot do. So this could be really simple stuff, such as not to use the property for any noisy, offensive, illegal, or immoral purpose. And then again, this mentions pets: not to keep any live animal or bird on the property without prior written consent of the landlord, which consent may be revoked at any time. Not to hang or expose clothes or other articles outside the property or any balcony, or shake anything out of the windows of the property. not to throw dirt, rubbish, rags. You get the idea. It's literally everything and anything you can't do as a leaseholder. But it's really, really interesting to read this back. And to make sure that obviously other people in the flats are following these rules as well, especially stuff like leaving bikes and creating rubbish. I've not ever seen anything be enforced, but all of the information is there, is basically stuff that you can and cannot do in the property. Now, there's so much more to a lease that I have not detailed. And the reason I'm not going to go through every specific section is because you'd probably be bored to death. I would probably be here for a good few hours. I've never even read this lease page to page. Now, obviously I would if I was buying a leasehold property again. But what I've mentioned so far is the most important things you need to pay attention to. But again, you do need to read this from a fine tooth comb if you are purchasing a leasehold property. And if there is areas you don't understand, Google them, leave me a comment below, or use your solicitor, because they should be able to provide you with the answers you need. And then other things you really need to pay attention to in a lease are specific clauses that may be a little bit unusual and are unique to your property. So in here, for example, I never knew, I was not allowed to put a for sale sign up without asking for pre-written consent, which obviously I didn't, and I didn't get in trouble for doing so, but I didn't even realise that was a thing. So it just reinforces the fact that it's not really yours, it's not really your property, which I just absolutely hate. And the other thing, like I said, is specific clauses. There was a specific clause in this that basically said, your living spaces, except the kitchen and bathroom, must be carpeted. Now, if I'd read this properly, I would have been like, but my kitchen and my living room was an open plan space, so it had wooden flooring, and that got pulled up when I was selling the property, and basically it just makes no total sense, because why would you have half a room carpet and half wooden flooring? But I get it, because it's to do with noise, and that is why flats say that you have to have carpet in living spaces. However, it just made no sense because it was a brand new lease. But if I'd read that at the time, and if my solicitor had pulled up on it, we would have been able to put rechange a clause or done something to it, because it resulted in me having to pay for an indemnity policy that was around £70. And at that point I'd already spent thousands pretty much trying to shift the flat, so you know what's £70. But it was a specific clause that no one has spotted before, and that is why it's really, really important to read it properly and get family or friends to read it as well, because they might spot something you've not seen. Hopefully today's video has shown you what a lease actually is when you purchase a leasehold property. It is your Bible. It's essentially all you own with the property. You don't own a brick, and it's really important remembering that. I know leasehold is the only way onto the property ladder for many, many people. So my videos are purely to educate and inform people about the things that I didn't realise when I purchased a leasehold property. Reading your lease page to page, the only instruction manual you ever should read properly, is going to save you a lot of stress, time, and potentially a lot of money later down the line. Now, as I said, if you've got any questions about a lease, what else it might pertain to, then please do leave me a comment below and I'll come straight back to you. I've detailed the most important things you need to look for in any lease, and this process should be done before you purchase a property, and this will be given to you by your solicitor during the purchasing process. But if you enjoyed watching today's video, please do give it a thumbs up, as it really helps my channel. And other than that, I hope you have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you on my next video.